Well, I'm thrilled to be here and to moderate this session and to be a part of the donor-sibling discussion. Just to give you a little bit of history about me, I live in Los Angeles with my wife and 3 children, and we conceived with an anonymous donor willing to be known when our children are 18. And I have to admit that the family creating process for us was very daunting from the very beginning. There were so many questions that we had to ask ourselves and so many things that need to be answered. Do we adopt? Do we foster adopt? Do we use a donor? Is that donor anonymous or willing to be known? And then what are the implications of the decisions that we make for our family? And even though our doctors and our cryo bank and our infertility clinic, because we actually went through 3 years of infertility, they all were really great resources, and there was a lot of information. But at the end of the day, I kept feeling like I was lacking that personal connection. I was really wanting to hear the success stories and talk to other people about some of the challenges that they were going through. It's interesting, I was talking to an associate the other day, and she and her wife are going through a donor selection process. And she's actually a casting director, so she's casting for her donor, which I think is brilliant and unique. And we joked that it would make a great reality show, which it's not going to be. But at some point in the process, I said to her, or in the discussion, I said, I found the process to be really awkward. Here my wife and I were flipping through this catalog of men that were going to one day be, have a huge impact on our lives genetically. And she agreed. She said it is awkward. The whole process is bizarre. And I think for me, I really wanted to hear sort of those inspirational stories. And so I said to her, I said, when you've selected your donor and you and your wife have gotten pregnant and you've created your family, all of this is going to be behind you one day. And it's going to be this small little blip in the process, and then you're going to have this amazing family on the other side of it, which is my case. And I needed to hear that when I was going through the process. I needed to connect with people. And I mentioned earlier that my wife and I went through infertility, and it was 3 long years of several sessions of IUI and IVF, and it felt like it was never going to end. And I remember one night I was scouring through the internet trying to find a success story, trying to find somebody that had gone through what I'd gone through. And I found this blog, and I was halfway through it, and I was really feeling like it was going to go somewhere positive. And then it got to this link, and it said, if you want to hear the rest of my story, buy my book. And that actually happened to me a couple times, and I was so frustrated with the fact that I couldn't just, get to the good stuff, that I vowed that when we started our family, no matter how it happened, I would sit down and write my success story, and it would be out there free for anyone to hear. So when we had our first child, I did that, and then I took it one step further and created a website called The Next Family, and it's an online magazine for the modern parent. So it's a collection of stories from 90-plus writers around the country writing about how their families have come to be via surrogacy, adoption, infertility, same-sex parents, single parents. So actually, in preparation for the panel today, I just went into the search engine to see what we had for donors and donor siblings. And we actually have pages of stories if you want to check it out. But just to discuss a few, if you want to look at the screen over here. This is a story by a lesbian mom who wanted to tell her kids about birds and the bees and her sperm donor. And so it's all about how she had that discussion with her kids and how their family came to be. The next story is by a woman that wanted to discuss the option of donor siblings, what we're talking about today in the panel, whether or not she's going to introduce her children to their donor siblings and what comes with that. Another writer of ours is really passionate about donor siblings and the extended family, and she actually wrote about being a sperm broker. And really what that was about for her was connecting people who had run out of sperm and couldn't get any more sperm for that particular donor from the bank, and was connecting them with other people that had used that same donor so that they could then expand their family. So there are a lot of stories on The Next Family. I would encourage you to check it out. If I've learned anything through this whole process, it's that everyone has their own way of coming to the decisions of how they're going to create their family. But sometimes it's nice to hear other people's stories, and there's always someone else that's going through the same thing that you are. So I would just encourage you to check out The Next Family. And Obviously, fertilityplanet.com and what they've done today is a really great resource. And so we'll kick off the panel, and I'd like to introduce our panelists today. And then if you want to hear any more information about them, you can go to fertilityplanet.com for their bios or to set an appointment. So first we have Dr. Catherine DeUgarte, and she's from Pacific Fertility of California in LA. And then we also have Stephen Lee, who is a filmmaker who has a film called An Extended Family, and he'll tell us about that. I actually watched the trailer and cried and considered changing my stance on donor siblings because we're right now not meeting our donor siblings. So Dr. DeUgarte, would you like to get started?
Thank you so much, and I can't wait to actually read your website. I'm excited to give it to my patients.
Oh,
it's a great resource because my patients always ask me that. Do you have any places I could read or I could understand more about this process? So that's one of the important things to give them knowledge and empower them with that information. But in terms of what I do, I'm a reproductive endocrinologist and a fertility physician. I did my training here at UCLA, and I've been in practice for since 2005, so almost 9 years now, and I love what I do, and I see all sorts of situations, and that's the one thing that they teach you in medical school. You know, it's very like black and white, and it's not like that in real practice, and there's so many different situations, and I love what I do, and that keeps me going, even though it's very busy, and I have 2 kids at home, so it's a good balance. But in terms of what I do, I deal with a lot of different relationships. I deal with single women who a lot of my friends are now. They're coming to freeze their eggs or embryos, or they're just deciding to just jump upon. That's why I say just like the Nike commercial, just do it. And they just decide to just find a sperm donor, either known or anonymous, and just do it. I have same-sex relationship couples who either have eggs from their partner so that they both contribute, or they actually go ahead and they choose either a known or non-known sperm donor. And I also deal with conventional couples and surrogacy patients as well. And it's very interesting that every time I think that I've seen it all, there's some new situation that comes up, and it's great, and it's usually a happy ending, so it's awesome.
That's great. And Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Stephen Lee. I'm a college professor at Santa Clara University up in the Bay Area. I'm also a filmmaker. That's what I get to do for my research, which I love. But probably more important for this panel, I'm the dad of twins who were born in 1998 using an open identity donor. Our sperm bank, the Sperm Bank of California, based in Berkeley, helped my wife Susan and I to form our family. 5 years after we had our children, we were given the opportunity to exchange information, contact information with other families who had used the same donor. And so we began an information exchange in 2003 when our children were 5. And that began very tentatively with some emails back and forth with families that lived outside of the Bay Area. But about 5 years after that, we took our first step to meet donor siblings face to face. So we met on neutral turf, as I'm fond of saying. We met at a picnic, and what we saw was just stunning to all the parents, because what we saw was our children connect in ways that we had never expected to happen. And we learned also that the parents seemed to have a whole lot in common that bonded them together. So we have been interacting with a total of 7 other families for now almost 10 years, a little over 10 years. And we've decided, my wife and I had decided about 2 years ago that we would like to make a documentary about this experience. So we have begun work on that documentary. We're actually about 90% through with our filming. We hope to finish editing and have the film be ready for viewing in October. And I brought a 2-minute teaser.
It's all these very intentional families. Like none of this just sort of happened, you know, one day when you had a little too much wine or whatever. This was like, you know,
He wasn't spontaneous.
Read the brochure, go through the files,
Write the check.
Yeah, exactly. Write the
Repeat.
check.
Last year in biology, we were doing recessive traits. And so I did my mom's side of the family, and then I was thinking, but this is technically about genetics, and I'm not related to my dad's side of the family. So I put the characters of Arrested Development on that side of the family.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. You want in? Everyone get their legs on me.
I don't think anyone can have a one word to describe it. It's new. Everything's new. It's like meeting new people, but at the same time, you sort of know them in a way. Because all of a sudden you have siblings. You're an only child for like so long, and then it's like, oh hey, got siblings.
I never really, put a face on him or anything, but I always thought it was kind of interesting that I could go in public and see just a bunch of men and be like, oh, maybe that could be my dad, It's just, really like anybody could be.
But it is an amazing thing to watch the kids together. It's compelling. The families are wonderful. We're all very different. It's a diverse group, but there's something about us that's similar enough that we chose this person. We're similar in that there's a generosity in our hearts to be open to this process and to be open to each other despite all of our differences. We put all that aside and just make a little circle for our kids to be in and to experience each other. And it's amazing. It's amazing.
More information about the film and about our small film company at firstpictures.org. And I've also been passing around those little postcards, so it has my contact information on it if you are inclined.
So you touched on it a little bit, but what was the inspiration to create the film? How did that come about?
Well, I think we were surprised that something that we frankly feared actually turned out so well. My wife used to say that we were committed that we were going to be very open with our process, and we were telling our kids right away what their experience was. So, I have blue eyes like Daddy. Well, you have blue eyes, but let's give you the 3-year-old version of genetics, right? And she's convinced that we got quiet about what we wanted to tell people, but I think we just kind of got caught up in raising kids. And then when we had to take the step of actually starting to exchange information, I think we were pretty hesitant because whether we wanted to be open or not, in my family's case, we could essentially hide behind the illusion of, creating a family, as in a traditional way. Mm-hmm. But we chose not to. We chose to be very open with people about that. And we realized that when we started to exchange information on the family contact list, that other families were taking exactly the same risk. Single moms that we met right away were very anxious to find the connection. And I think that they were really trying to figure out, is there a linkage to my child, and can I give my child more context? Because none of the moms have ever said they were looking for family. They were looking for context. And then when the 2-mom families, we had 3 2-mom families in the group, they also were presented with essentially the situation that they have to be open every day. They don't get to hide behind society's privilege that my heterosexuality gives me. They have to tell their story all the time. And so they were really, again, trying to have their children understand not where they came from, but who they were in kind of an interesting 3-dimensional world. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we started interacting with the families. And then when we saw what an interesting and unique experience it was, not just the kids bonding, but the parents bonding. I'm a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. This is a good film. It's a good topic. Let's make a film. Yeah.
Right.
Were there any other kids that chose not to be involved? Are there other families
Right,
with the same sperm donor?
So my sperm bank theoretically limited the use of the sperm donor to 10 families. There was some slow reporting, and so in my case, there are 12 families that used my donor, and there are a total of 19 children. We know 10 of them, and one of the families that we know has chosen to not be in the film. They actually have a very complex story where it's two moms, both of whom used the donor to have children separated by about 2 years, and then they split up. And those kids don't see each other because it was a very acrimonious split. And they just didn't want that to potentially be part of the film. And I can tell you right now, everybody that participated in the film went in with absolute fear that I was going to reveal something about them, that I was going to reveal the troubles in the relationship, or I was going to reveal the pain of their journey. And it's like, you tell me what you want to tell me. And so once they got through interviews, it was like, gung ho, let's make this film. They were very excited to get their stories out. So.
It's a tricky topic. I mean, like I said in the beginning, we opted not to, we went with an anonymous donor, and our feeling was we kind of wanted to keep it as our tight-knit family, and we didn't want to blur any lines. And so when the donor sibling question came up, it was sort of like, yeah, no, we don't need that. But it's interesting watching your film and actually having some experience with some of our writers who have extended their family in that way. It's a really interesting concept, and I don't think it's something that we're entirely ruling out. Do you face with your clients, do they ask you these questions? How do you counsel them? Let's start with how do you counsel them on anonymous versus known donor? Do they ask you about?
Yeah, so most of them who come in don't have a lot of information or haven't really thought it out in terms of the plan. So I always go through the process. I always tell them that there's always a choice in terms of getting an anonymous or known donor, and I go through the risks and the benefits of both. So usually what I tell them is getting a known donor, the advantages are that you know who the person is, there's no hidden agenda, you know exactly what you're getting, but obviously sometimes the genetics isn't transmitted. Just because they look a certain way, it doesn't mean that your kid will look the same way, because looks are a combination of environment and genetics. And I also tell them that sometimes getting somebody who's known, such as a friend, can be tricky in terms of, do you tell other people that you know? Are you going to tell the family members? Are you just going to tell this person and not tell the kid? Is the kid going to find out from Uncle Joey at the Christmas party that found out from Aunt Mary that got drunk and then tells the kid? So that's what I'm worried about, having like a known situation. And also it's actually more expensive getting somebody that you know, because I always require them to get a legal contract, which is very important. Even if it's your best friend, I think it's important from a custody perspective, and this is, the person who chose to have this child, it's their kid, unless they specify otherwise in the legal contract. It's also more expensive because when you go to a California cryobank or some other cryobanks, it's approximately $700 for a vial, and that's basically all you have to pay for in terms of the sperm. This way you have to pay for genetic testing for the donor, for STD testing, psychological screening, legal contract ends up being more like $3,000-$4,000. So it's a lot more expensive to go with somebody known. And also a lot of them end up having bad sperm. For whatever reason, the ones that I've tested, the known donors end up being bad sperm. They just had no idea because they were never tested before. So sometimes they're not like a good, in terms of a good potential donor. So those are the main thing about knowing your donor. The anonymous, the advantage is it's super easy. I mean, you can get that sperm in a day. You can go right now and just get a vial, and that's so easy if you obviously aren't very picky.
Easier said than done until you're looking through that catalog.
I've had patients go in an hour and pick a sperm in emergency situations.
Wow, interesting.
And I've had patients who take a year to find a sperm donor.
Yeah.
So it depends on how picky you are and obviously what you want. And I've actually helped some of my best friends who've frozen their embryos go ahead and just go through the catalog with them and just kind of pick one. And some sounded great. We were ready to get parked outside the cryobank and meet number 1159 or whatever it was. So, but in terms of getting unknown, obviously you don't know if they're lying. You don't know if they're saying, are they really right that on their history, and you actually know more about your sperm donor than I know about my husband. I mean, it's amazing how much detail these donors have. But again, it's a matter of, do you trust what they write? So what I usually tell my patients, if somebody has all great-grandparents and all grandparents never had any problems, like no heart attack, no diabetes, no high blood pressure, I kind of wonder, are they lying? Because how can somebody not have any single disease in their family? That's really unlikely. So I say stay away from those donors.
So it's an interesting question, like the criteria for selecting a donor. What was your process for that, Stephen?
We took almost 8 or 9 months to select. We went through, I can't tell you how many brochures we looked through, how many donor profiles we looked through. Back in '97, all of this was physical paper, so we would have to go to the sperm bank and look through the catalogs. But in terms of selecting I think we should actually start with selecting your sperm bank, because they have different inclinations. So I was telling you before the panel that my wife and I attended a big conference like this, and we were sitting in the audience, and we had members of 3 different sperm banks up on the stage. And 2 of them were essentially trying to argue as to who had the better celebrity look-alike catalog. And the third was the head of the Sperm Bank of California, who said, we limit our donors in terms of this many families. We started the first open identity program in the world. We do all this medical testing way up and beyond what is required by law. We just had the right vibe, and so we picked the sperm bank because we felt like they were in it for kind of the right reason. They were doing it for what we consider to be more altruistic reasons. And picking a donor, I think that same question informed, or that same gut feeling informed our look at the donor profiles. We weren't interested in somebody who told me that they were so smart that we would be lucky to have their genes in our mix. We weren't drawn to donors who said that they really wanted to get paid for something they liked to do. We went
honest.
Yeah, and it's interesting was we went through our families as we've gone through and interviewed all the families in the film. What we see over and over is we picked the guy because he struck us that he was a good soul. Except for one family that said, we've tried 8 or 10 times to get pregnant. I'm 41, I have to get pregnant. Who has the highest sperm count of anyone in the bank? And it just happened to be the same thing. So at least they were candid.
Right, right. Yeah, for us, I definitely think this sperm bank comes into play. The first sperm bank that we used, we actually were like 3 months into the IUI process and our vial showed up empty. And that is major when you're timing your process. And so then we quickly switched banks. But the donor criteria for us was about, for me, it was my egg. And so it was really important that we sort of integrate my wife into the process. And so we tried to mirror her as best we could in our selection process. So my wife is Jewish, so we went with a Jewish donor. We kind of tried to go with similar coloring. And it's always tricky, I know that, but we wanted to feel like there was some sort of connection in that way. And then obviously medical records and intelligence and all of that good stuff was important. But at the end of the day, when we had that small sort of selection whittled down, for us it came down to the connection with the donor through the audio interviews. So we listened to their audio interviews and we really thought about would we want this person in our life and how do we connect with this person. So for us, and it was really clear right away when we heard the donor that we selected. So. And then you just hope and pray that you get pregnant. So you probably have some interesting stories to tell about, is there anything interesting about donor processes or what some of your clients have done that you could share with us? I know you were mentioning one really unique situation.
I was going to read you what she wrote. So I've had all sorts of situations, women having to use their brother-in-law's sperm because their husband doesn't have any sperm, even the father-in-law, which gets a bit tricky for some patients. And one of my coolest and awesomest couples that I've actually helped is a same-sex couple, and we've got them up here. And they actually really wanted to try to make it today, and unfortunately they're both such busy ladies that they couldn't. So that's Jen and Stacy, and they allowed me to use their pictures. And so they first came to me and they said, we both have a brother and we want to get pregnant, and we would love for you to help us. So Jen, the one with the blonde hair, she wanted to get pregnant first. So she used her Stacy's brother's sperm, and she actually happened to get pregnant on the first try with a baby boy. That's Mason over there, and he is about 4 years old right now. And so when he was about 1.5, they came back and they said, we want a sibling for Mason, but this time we'd like to have Stacy get pregnant. And I have a brother, and so I'd like Stacy to get pregnant with my brother. So then Stacy, on the left here, got pregnant with Jen's brother's sperm. And so it took her like 2 tries, which was great. And so now they have a baby girl too. So it's a great family, and genetically, it's like very perfectly balanced family, and they're just lovely. And I'm sorry they couldn't be here to meet you guys, but I am gonna read the email that she sent me this morning. And this is what she tells the kids. So again, one's 4, one's 20 months, and she says, we tell the kids that they don't have a dad, but they have 2 moms, but that they each have a special uncle who brought them into the world. Mason is already familiar with the dialogue, and we've heard him tell his friends how his family works. The kids will always know that their special Uncle Josh and their special Uncle Wes are their biological fathers. It works for us. And I just thought that was really cool that they did that. And it worked so great.
What about donor siblings? Do you get asked that question, and how do you handle that?
I haven't been around, I feel like, as much because I've only been doing this for 8 to 10 years. So I think a lot of my kids are still small at this point. I haven't talked to my patients as much, but we talk about it, and do you want to pick a sperm donor that would want to be open in the future? And actually, most of them don't. It's interesting. Most of them don't want to pick a donor that's open in the future. And I tell them, make sure you kind of put a lot of thought into that. And obviously, most donors are not open donors out there. So it's a tricky situation, but definitely I'm so glad that this talk is happening today, because I'd love to know what to tell patients, and your story is going to be great to be able to reference that for patients, to see that people do need them. It's awesome. And I'm a single child. I would love to have siblings. I think if my parents told me, hey, you know what, you have 8 brothers and sisters out there, I'd be very excited.
Or 19.
8, 19. Yeah. When did you find it was good to tell your kids about their siblings?
We were committed that we were going to tell our kids as soon as they started asking. We were going to be open with them about the process. It probably came up at around age 5, which would make sense. That's when we started interacting with the family that lives in Maine, and because we were open with them about that, we had the opportunity to exchange information with a single mom, who had a son who was about 6 months older than Jack and Sophie, my kids. And so we started telling them, and because here the exchanges are tentative, and then it's this massive information about in both directions. Here's what's going on in my family, here's what's going on in mine, here are photos. And so we were saying, here's Matthew, do you see any similarity? I kind of look like Matthew, Sophie says. I have Matthew's neck, Jack says. These long turtlenecks. So we decided to talk about it early on. But I think my kids' experience has been different with the whole donor sibling thing. They have a sibling all the time. The kids that are single child families, I think are much more interested in finding that connection and trying to understand that as a brother-sister relationship. Because my kids did this very odd thing around 11 and 12, where they started talking about Jack is my brother, and Matthew and Liam are are my siblings. They were building essentially another layer to the onion. And they were trying to figure out a way to distinguish their relationship as direct siblings versus what it meant to be part of a donor sibling group.
So where do you see this going, this connection that you have with all these siblings now? Do you see it really? Do you have any concept?
Three of the kids are coming from different parts of the states to go to a writing camp together in Ohio this summer. All of the families are gathering in Texas. Why are we gathering in Texas, in Central Texas in the summer? Great place to be, but very hot. But we're all gathering in July for our, essentially a family reunion. We actually gathered all the families together for the film about a month and a half ago, just outside of Stanford University, at a hostel. And 3 weeks before that event was going to come off, another family joined the contact list. And so we exchanged information really quickly. I let Lori know that we were going to do this filming thing, and they were welcome to come out and join us, but they had to realize we were filming, and they couldn't say no. This was something that was key to my film. And they just said, okay. And the next day they sent us flight information. They came out and met everybody cold. And it was pretty amazing. And within 20 minutes, side by side, Anna and my daughter Sophie, I'm so glad I have a sister. It was just amazing, just amazing. Yeah. All the other kids were boys, exactly.
The interesting thing about this whole family creating process to me is that when you go to start your family, whether you're a straight couple or a gay couple, you really have no idea the journey that you're about to go on. And it starts from the very, very beginning. When you become a parent, I think that continues. But, would you have ever known in a million years that you'd be sitting here having this discussion when you first decided to create a family with your wife?
No,
right?
I don't think I would have ever even imagined it. But guess what? It's about as normal as it can be. And one way to make it normal is to talk about it.
Yeah. So I should ask, does anyone in the audience have any questions?
I'll ask the first one. Just a question for Brandy. So your kids are younger, right?
Yeah.
What, and you guys got a donor that said after 18 he would become available. Do you know what the laws are or anything? What if your children, when they're 13 or 12 or something like that, start asking the questions? They want to know who my, bio dad is. How do you see that conversation going? And is it if you guys change your minds, or is it if the kid is really wanting to do this? Is there a way to make the contact that donor, or do you definitely have to wait till they're over 18?
That's a good question. You may know the answer to that question more than I do, but I was always under the impression that when they're not really willing to be contacted until your kids are 18. But I don't know. Do you know the answer?
I know that they have an option even then. That's what I've been told, that at 18, when the kid's 18, they can contact, but they can still refuse, even though they said initially they're okay to meet.
Yeah,
they might actually refuse to meet because they may be in a family, or who knows the situation there.
Yeah.
So it's not 100% for sure that you can actually meet this donor.
I'm wondering. I think I saw a movie or something where they where they wanted to find out earlier, and they went into the sperm bank or something like that. I'm just wondering what the laws is. I guess I can look it up.
Well, the contract that a sperm donor makes with a sperm bank is that he will agree to have his contact information, his identity and contact information, released to the child when he or she reaches the age of majority, 18. And at least in the case of the sperm bank that we use, about 38% of the kids come forward between the ages of 18 and 21 to get the information about the sperm donor, and less than half of those actually end up contacting the donor. And I think it's because what they're looking for is essentially an identity.
We can open up to some audience questions. Does anybody have any questions? Hold on. The price is right.
Hi, thanks. If you have a known donor, but they're not in the same state as you, how does that work? Do you pick a fertility clinic where you live, and then they can donate their sperm where they live, and does it get sent over? Like, how does that all work? Do they have to physically be together?
So I just had a situation with that. So, well, first of all, you have to screen them. So if it's so I would start the process. I would find a fertility clinic in their area, and get their STD testing and their semen analysis. And then I would have them, if everything looks good, then I would have them fly here, and then you have the whole issue of directed donor versus anonymous versus if they're a partner. I have sometimes patients who have a sexual partner that's their directed donor, and sometimes they're not. And so the FDA has all these rules about if they give fresh sperm and it's a directed donor, so somebody, let's say from another state, has to come here and get blood tests within a week of giving the sperm. Or what's easier, most of my patients do, is they actually freeze the sperm, and the day that the sperm gets frozen, that's the day we do the STD testing, so that we have it available whenever the patient ovulates.
I just know from my research that you are able to freeze the sperm and then transport it across the state, but they do say that there's a higher chance if you use fresh sperm. So if that person was willing to come over at the right time of the month and you guys do it then, I think that's an option as well. So either one. Are there any other questions?
Clearly, we are considering. I'm wondering if you all have seen cases where the child reaches the age of 18, that he or she might have donor siblings that are younger, because then odds are the younger ones will also know who the donor is. How to navigate that?
Okay, you're raising what I consider to be kind of the central ethical question that all the families are negotiating with their children. So the sperm bank that we use has an agreement that when a kid reaches 18, he or she can get the information if they choose. The parent can't get it, all right, at any age. But if the child wants it, he or she can get it. In our case, we have our oldest child in our group, in the film, will turn 18 in November. And he has made it known that he is going to be at the sperm bank on his birthday to get the information. He lives 4 blocks away from one of his donor sibs, and they have known each other for 5 years, and they treat each other like brothers. All right, that's how they refer to themselves. We are brothers. They see each other 3 times a week. So I've posed this question to all of the kids and to all the parents. What are you going to do? Because we know that the kids are going to get together. And what I hear from the kids is that's Liam's experience when he turns 18. I frankly want my own experience when I turn 18. And if I choose to get the information, I'll choose to get it. But I'm not expecting Liam to give it to me, and I'm not going to ask. Now, that may change when they're hanging out together and trying to figure out what that relationship's going to be. But this is a big thorny issue in my group because we have the family in Maine, the single mom family in Maine. The son does not want to get the information about the donor. At least that's what he said 6 months ago. Last I heard, maybe he wants the information. The mom doesn't want him to get the information about the donor. And I think she's trying to work through how she's described family for him for a long time. But I think the kids, at least, are telling us maybe they're telling us what we want to hear, but they are saying they are going to keep the information to themselves. Did any of you see Generation Cryo? Okay. One of the things that's troubling to me when I look at Generation Cryo is that one of the kids wants to get this information, and she enlists the other donor siblings to go on her quest to out this donor, even though he's an anonymous donor. And I find that to be a really troubling interaction. And we've actually used the film as a point of discussion in the group. What would we do if we were faced with the same situation? And it's trying to be respectful of Matthew's perspective, versus Liam's versus Jack and Sophie's and the parents. And so the kids are walking very carefully. So I hope that helps.
And one of my concerns as a physician is that some sperm banks are better than others in restricting the number of pregnancies. But my concern is that if there are no open donations, and these kids could potentially meet one day and have, genetically abnormal kids because they're siblings. So that's one of my reasons why I think it'd be so important to have like a countrywide keeping track. And when people get married, just to make sure to do some kind of genetic testing, which may happen in the future. Our genetic testing capabilities are getting better and better, just to figure out that you're not marrying your half brother or sister.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
So for Stephen, I'm curious about Liam's experience. What is it that he wants to know so bad from his donor, and what are his expectations and why?
Liam has told me that he wants to meet his father. That's the word he uses, father. Now, Liam comes from a two-mom family. When he tells me he wants to meet his father, that doesn't resonate right for me because I'm a father, right? I'm obviously the social dad here, but I know what a father does every day. But he wants to meet he wants to meet the donor because he wants to find out more about himself. He said, I've always been curious, I want to know. So Liam was the kid that was in the clip where he was saying, I go out in public and it could be anybody. I look at men and it could be anybody, could be my father. I think he wants to address that question. He doesn't want it to be anybody. He wants it to know who it is. And not necessarily that he wants a relationship, but he just wants to know who it is.
Okay, well, this has been a great discussion, and thank you, Dr. DeUgarte, for being here. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Yvonne. And a very special thanks to, very special thanks to the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center for supporting this donor-sibling conversation. You can learn, like I said before, you can learn about all the speakers and even set up appointments by going to fertilityplanit.com. You can also watch videos of all the sessions for free for the next 3 months on the website. And thanks to Fora.tv for recording this program. And then a special thanks to our audience for participating. Please continue the conversations on Twitter and Facebook and hashtag FPLA14. Thanks for being with us.